The Mafia boss slumps in his chair, eyes closed, pretending to nap, testing if his new maid will steal or betray him. But when she leans close, her whisper cuts the silence. "Don't touch the right glass. Your nephew poisoned it exactly 5:12. His breath catches. Who is this woman, and how does she know his family's secrets before he does? That whisper would change everything. Before we uncover who survives this night, hit the subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. You might just want someone watching your back too. Now, let's begin. In a wood-paneled study that smelled of old leather and gun oil, Salvatore the Sphinx, Romano practiced the only religion he trusted: control. Rain ticked against the windows, and a single desk lamp pulled long shadows across his mahogany desk. 2 crystal tumblers sat on the side table, one on the correct coaster. One shifted slightly to the right. The amber liquid caught the light like trapped fire. He had spent 30 years perfecting the rituals that kept him breathing. Never drink the first pour. Never eat the first bite. Never sleep where a camera could see his throat pulse. Tonight, he would break the last rule. The Sphinx reclined in his leather chair and let his eyes fall shut, breathing settling into the slow rhythm of exhaustion. His lapel lay askew, a detail that would bother the kind of person who noticed details, the kind of person he needed to measure. Footsteps whispered across marble in the corridor, precise, unhurried. The new maid moved like a clean measure of music, no wasted notes. Naomi Nye Jones pushed her cart to the study threshold and paused, cataloging. The boss slumped in his chair, chin tilted at the vulnerable angle of deep sleep. Rain drummed the windows. 2 glasses on the side table, amber liquid still faintly warm in both. Someone had been here recently. The wrong coaster. Her eyes swept the room. The St. Michael statue shifted 3 inches from its dust shadow, fresh ash on the Persian rug where no one ever walked. The corridor camera with its 20-second loop she'd timed twice this week. Everything in this house was a message if you knew how to read it. She stepped inside, movements fluid and nearly silent. Her cleaning supplies masked the soft whir of the RF detector in her apron pocket, a habit from her old life. When numbers told stories, and stories revealed crimes. The lapel of his jacket had escaped his collar, a small imperfection that would gnaw at him when he woke. Nye set down her silver cleaning spray and reached across his chair, fingers brushing the expensive wool back into place. That's when she saw it: condensation ring under the right-hand glass. Still wet. The left glass sat properly centered on its coaster, but the right one had been moved recently, by someone who didn't know the exact placement mattered. 5:12. She'd seen Marco Romano in this hallway at 5:12, carrying a silver tray, whistling something soft and off-key. The Sphinx's breathing was too controlled, too measured. Men who slept like the dead didn't survive 40 years in this business. Nye leaned close, her breath fogging the edge of his ear. "Don't touch the right-hand glass," she whispered. "Your nephew swapped the decanter at 5:12. Salvatore's eyes snapped open. Not slowly, not with the groggy confusion of interrupted sleep, but instantly, pupils contracting in the amber light, heart slamming against his ribs like a caged animal. The woman straightened, taking one careful step back. For a moment neither spoke. Rain filled the silence, a rhythm older than ambition, older than blood. Fear. He tasted it like copper on his tongue, the emotion he'd spent decades training out of his system. This woman, this maid who cleaned like she was mapping evidence, had just named the exact time of his murder. The villa stirred to life with the precision of clockwork. By 6:15 a.m., the kitchen hummed with controlled chaos, coffee brewing in silver urns, newspapers pressed and folded, breakfast trays arranged like surgical instruments. Nye moved through the morning ritual with the other staff, but her mind was still in the study, replaying the weight of Salvatore's final words. "You'll keep my eyes open." She understood the mathematics of it. In a house where loyalty was currency and betrayal was blood, she had just been promoted from furniture to weapon. The question was whether she'd live long enough to use the position. New girl. The voice belonged to Maria Santos, the head housekeeper, a woman whose gray hair was pulled into a bun so tight it could cut glass. "Boss wants his coffee at 7 sharp. 1 sugar, no cream. The china cup with the gold rim, not the everyday service." Understood. Nye accepted the tray, noting how Maria's eyes lingered on her hands, checking for steadiness. In a house where the wrong gesture could mean death, even coffee service was an audition. The kitchen fell into the comfortable rhythm of morning preparation. Nye watched, cataloging. Giuseppe the cook, humming off-key while he diced vegetables. Anna, the younger maid, polishing silver with movements that spoke of long practice. And at the massive oak table in the breakfast nook, two men who commanded different kinds of attention. Vittorio Greco sat with his back to the wall, reading financial reports with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey. 45. Immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His fingers moved across the pages like a pianist's practiced, elegant, deadly. When he looked up and smiled at her, the expression never reached his eyes. "You must be Naomi," he said, voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "I'm Vittorio Greco, the family's business advisor. I trust you're settling in well?" "Yes, sir, thank you." "Excellent. Attention to detail is so important in a house like this." His gaze swept her face, cataloging, measuring. "I imagine someone with your background appreciates the value of precision." The pause before background carried weight. He knew something, or suspected something, or was fishing to see what she'd give away. Nye met his smile with professional neutrality. "Details matter, yes, sir." "Indeed they do." Greco returned to his papers, but she felt his attention like a hand on her shoulder even as she moved away. Marco Romano sprawled in the chair across from Greco, with the casual confidence of inherited power. 32, handsome in the way that opened doors and softened interrogations, but there was something hollow behind the charm. A quality that reminded Nye of expensive furniture, beautiful on the surface, rotting at the core. "Uncle Sal's new favorite," Marco said, raising his coffee cup in mock salute. "Word travels fast around here." "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Romano." "Marco, please. We're all family here." His grin was warm, practiced, and entirely synthetic. "Though I have to say, it's unusual for the old man to take such a personal interest in the help." The comment landed with surgical precision, a test wrapped in casual conversation. Nye arranged her expression into mild confusion. "Personal interest, sir? Private meeting at dawn? That's unprecedented." Marco leaned back, studying her reaction. Makes a man curious about what kind of conversation requires such discretion. Before Nye could respond, Greco's voice cut across the tension like silk over steel. "Marco, I'm sure Naomi has duties to attend to, as do we all." The nephew's smile flickered just for a moment with something sharper. Then the charm slid back into place. "Of course. Duty first. Always." Nye carried the coffee tray through corridors that seemed to breathe with hidden life. Morning light slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spies. She moved with purpose, but her accountant's mind was working, processing, cataloging, building the database that might keep her alive. The St. Michael statue in the chapel alcove had been moved again, 3 inches northeast of its dust shadow, exactly as she'd noted before. But now she could see the pattern. The statue commanded a view of both the main staircase and the corridor leading to Salvatore's private elevator. Someone was using it as a watchtower, repositioning it based on daily needs. The Persian rug in the unused sitting room bore fresh ash despite the fireplace being cold for weeks. Someone had stood there recently, smoking, watching the courtyard through sheer curtains. The ash pattern suggested deliberate placement, not casual disposal, but calculated surveillance. And the corridor camera. She timed it again as she passed 22 seconds of normal feed, then a loop so seamless most people would never notice. But the loop always showed the same maid walking past with the same tray, the same purposeful stride. Someone had recorded the pattern and was using it to mask activity during specific windows. The mathematics of deception, hidden in plain sight. She found Salvatore in his study, reviewing documents that disappeared into a safe the moment she entered. The morning light softened his features, but his eyes remained sharp as surgical instruments. "Your observations," he said without preamble. Nye set the coffee down with practiced precision. "The house has routines within routines, official schedules and shadow schedules, 2 different heartbeats." "Explain." "Your nephew asks questions designed to gauge your trust in me. Mr. Greco watches everyone like they're entries in a ledger he's trying to balance. The staff moves efficiently, but there are gaps, times when certain people aren't where their duties suggest they should be." Salvatore sipped his coffee, waiting. "The string quartet rehearses twice weekly," she continued. "Tuesdays and Fridays, 7 to 9 p.m. Perfect acoustic cover for conversations that need privacy." "You've been thorough." "It's what I'm trained for." He studied her with the intensity of a man whose life depended on reading people correctly. "Your charter is simple. Observe, remember, report. Nothing written, no evidence trail." Your memory is the only record that exists. Understood. Trust is a luxury I can't afford, Salvatore said. But information is a necessity I can't survive without. You'll be my eyes in rooms where I can't go, my ears in conversations I can't hear. And if I discover something that implicates family? The question hung between them like smoke from an extinguished candle. When Salvatore answered, his voice carried the weight of 30 years in power. Then you tell me the truth, and I'll decide what justice looks like. Leaving the study, Nye's route took her past the service entrance where delivery trucks made their morning rounds. Giuseppe signed for produce, Anna accepted dry cleaning, and Marcus, one of the security guards, checked packages with practiced efficiency. A clipboard lay momentarily unattended on the loading dock counter. Nye glanced at it as she passed, her trained eye catching the header on a yellow delivery receipt. Aquila Protective Services. Invoice number AQ 2847. Below it, itemized charges for security consultation and electronic asset protection. She memorized the invoice number, the amounts, the authorization signature. Then, when Marcus stepped away to direct a delivery truck, she quickly tore the bottom corner of the receipt, just enough to capture the Aquila header and partial account information. The paper felt like fire in her apron pocket. Aquila. The word settled under her skin like a hook, sharp and insistent. She'd heard that name before, whispered in courthouse corridors 2 years ago, when she was still chasing the paper trail of her brother's death. A security company with connections to private contractors and convenient gaps in their client records. The same company now apparently providing services to the Romano family. As she walked back toward the kitchen, Nye felt the house's true heartbeat for the first time. Not the obvious rhythm of daily routines, but the deeper pulse of secrets and surveillance, of loyalty bought and sold, of family bonds stretched to their breaking point. She was no longer just cleaning this house. She was reading it like a crime scene, one receipt at a time. And somewhere in its mahogany-walled chambers, someone was planning to write the final chapter of Salvatore Romano's story in blood. The linen room occupied a corner of the villa's second floor, its shelves stacked with Egyptian cotton and Italian silk that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nye arranged towels with meticulous care, but her real attention focused on the small device hidden in her cleaning caddy, an RF detector disguised as a fabric refresher spray. She had learned long ago that the best hiding places were in plain sight. Accountants called it data and noise, the crucial information buried in routine transactions. Today, she would map this house's electronic nervous system the same way she once traced embezzled funds through legitimate business expenses. The detector's readings spiked near the east wall, faint but consistent. Someone had wired this section of the house, and recently, the adhesive residue on the baseboards was still tacky, the paint barely dry over hastily patched holes. Moving with practiced efficiency, Nye folded sheets and cataloged signals. The pattern emerged like a constellation. Electronic whispers following the villa's main arteries, clustered around choke points where conversations naturally occurred. The chapel alcove felt different in afternoon light. Dust motes danced around St. Michael's bronze wings, and Nye approached the statue with the reverence expected of good help. She knelt as if to polish the base, but her fingers traced the archangel's wing until they found it a pinprick hole, perfectly circular, hidden in the shadow where wing met shoulder. The RF burst was strongest here, cycling every few minutes in precise intervals. She checked her watch. 2:17 p.m. The next spike came at 2:19, then 2:21. Mechanical precision, like a heartbeat programmed in silicon. Her fingers found traces of clear adhesive around the hole's edge, the kind used for electronic components. Someone had embedded a microphone so small it was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The transmission pattern suggested voice activation, probably synced to specific acoustic triggers. String quartet rehearsals. The timing would be perfect music to mask the data bursts. Regular scheduling to predict transmission windows. Nye polished the statue's base with deliberate strokes, her mind racing. This wasn't amateur hour. This was professional-grade surveillance, the kind that required technical expertise and expensive equipment, the kind that left paper trails. From the second-floor balcony, Vittorio Greco watched the new maid work with the focused intensity of a scientist observing bacteria. She moved with efficiency, yes, but there was something else, a systematic quality to her movements that suggested training beyond domestic service. He had spent 20 years reading people like balance sheets, and Naomi Jones didn't add up. Her references were too clean, her reactions too controlled, her observations too precise. She noticed things that maids shouldn't notice, and remembered details that servants typically forgot. More troubling was Salvatore's sudden interest. The old man hadn't taken a personal meeting with household staff in over a decade. Now he was granting private audiences at dawn and issuing direct orders through channels that bypassed the normal hierarchy. Greco adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd never quite conquered, and made a mental note to accelerate certain timelines. Variables were multiplying, and in his experience, too many variables led to equations that didn't balance. The maid finished her work and moved toward the service stairwell with the same purposeful grace she'd displayed since arrival. Greco watched until she disappeared, then reached for his phone to make a call that would seem routine to anyone monitoring the house's communication logs. After all, a consigliere's job was to anticipate problems before they became crises. The service stairwell echoed with Nye's footsteps as she descended toward the main floor. Halfway down, she nearly collided with Marco Romano, who was ascending with unusual haste. "Careful," he said, steadying her elbow. "These old stairs can be treacherous." "My apologies, Mr. Romano." "Marco." His smile was automatic, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the villa's careful climate control. "Actually, I'm glad I ran into you. You haven't seen a keycard lying around, have you? Black plastic about the size of a credit card?" Nye considered. "What sort of keycard?" "Security access for the wine cellar. I must have dropped it somewhere during my rounds." His voice carried a note of genuine anxiety beneath the casual inquiry. "Uncle Sal gets particular about accountability with the security protocols. I can check the lost and found in the laundry room." "That would be." Marco's relief was so pronounced it made Nye's mental alarms chime. "That would be very helpful. Thank you." 20 minutes later, she discovered the keycard wedged between two washing machines, obviously planted, but in a location that would seem plausibly accidental. When she returned it to Marco, his gratitude was effusive and telling. Men didn't celebrate finding keys unless those keys opened doors they desperately needed to access. That evening, Nye sorted laundry in the mechanical rhythm that freed her mind to wander. The RF detector registered steady pulses from the chapel above, and she found herself thinking about patterns electronic and human, digital and emotional. The memory surfaced unbidden. Isaiah at the Blue Moon Jazz Club, his fingers dancing across piano keys with the same systematic precision she brought to forensic accounting. He'd been playing Strange Fruit the night the bullets started flying, the melody cut short by gunfire that shattered windows and dreams in equal measure. The news reports had been consistent. Romano family feud erupts in nightclub violence. 3 dead, including innocent bystander Isaiah Jones, pianist. But Nye had paid for her own ballistic analysis. The shots hadn't come from the club's interior, where Romano soldiers allegedly started the fight. They'd come from a rooftop across the street, professional angles, calculated trajectories, the kind of precision that suggested military training rather than spontaneous gang violence. Someone had orchestrated that shooting, used Isaiah as collateral damage in a larger game. Someone who needed the Romano family to look responsible for civilian casualties, who benefited from public outrage and police pressure. Someone who was very good at making violence look like someone else's fault. Near midnight, when the string quartet's rehearsal reached its crescendo in the music room below, Nye returned to the chapel. The RF bursts synchronized perfectly with the musical peaks data transmission masked by Vivaldi's Four Seasons. She worked quickly, using tools from her old life. A dental pick to extract the microphone, tweezers to disconnect the leads, steady hands to install the replacement device she'd prepared. The new microphone was identical to the original, except for one crucial difference. It was completely dead, a perfect electronic corpse that would register on monitoring equipment but transmit nothing but silence. The real microphone went into a small metal case that would block any residual signal. Evidence, carefully preserved. As she worked, Nye timed the RF bursts with her phone's stopwatch. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Every 2 minutes and 17 seconds, regular as a metronome. But metronomes could be reset, rhythms could be changed, and whoever was conducting this particular symphony had no idea their orchestra was about to lose its most important instrument. The statue looked exactly as it had before, St. Michael's bronze features serene and unchanging, but now the archangel was truly silent, no longer whispering secrets to ears that shouldn't hear them. Walking back to her quarters, Nye reflected on the mathematics of betrayal. Someone in this house was playing a complex game, surveillance and access cards, security contracts, and convenient malfunctions. The pattern suggested careful planning, professional execution, and most dangerous of all, intimate knowledge of the Romano family's routines and vulnerabilities. The RF detector in her pocket registered one final burst from the chapel, then fell silent. The metronome of treason had been reset to a rhythm of her choosing. Now she just had to survive long enough to conduct the finale. Rain drummed against the study windows as dusk painted the villa in shades of amber and shadow. Salvatore Romano sat behind his mahogany desk, watching Naomi Jones arrange evidence on the leather inlay with the precision of a forensic pathologist laying out an autopsy. For 40 years, his survival had depended on one unbreakable rule: trust no one until they prove otherwise. The phrase had become his scripture, carved into every decision, every alliance, every moment when instinct battled necessity. Tonight that rule would either save him or kill him. "Show me," he said. Nye placed the St. Michael statue base on the desk, its bronze surface catching the lamplight. A perfect circular hole pierced the archangel's wing, barely visible unless you knew where to look. "Microphone," she said. Voice activated, transmitting in 2-minute bursts during string quartet rehearsals. The music masks the data transmission. She set a small metal case beside the base. "This is what I removed. The replacement I installed is completely dead." Salvatore studied the tiny device through the case's transparent lid. "Professional grade, expensive, military precision. How long?" "Based on adhesive degradation and paint overlay patterns, approximately 6 weeks. Installed during the second-floor renovation when workmen had legitimate access. 6 weeks. Long enough to record dozens of private conversations, business negotiations, family councils. Long enough to map his entire operation from the inside." The Sphinx felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear, but the recognition of how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "Continue." Nye produced a tablet, fingers dancing across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Corridor camera, 3rd floor east wing. 22-second loop, perfectly seamless. The timing allows someone to move through the blind spot undetected every few minutes." The video played in silence, the same maid walking past with the same silver tray, over and over, a digital ghost providing cover for flesh and blood treachery. The Aquila invoices. She spread photocopied receipts across the desk like tarot cards predicting doom. Security consultation, electronic asset protection, climate monitoring systems. All authorized by Mr. Greco, all coinciding with periods of unusual activity in the house. Salvatore's eyes moved across the paper trail, recognizing signatures, dates, amounts, the mathematics of betrayal, hidden in legitimate business expenses. Climate monitoring? Wine cellar temperature spikes, half-degree increases every 8 minutes on rehearsal nights. Nye's fingers traced the graph she'd somehow obtained. Consistent with electronic equipment cycling on and off, warming patterns suggest something significant running on a timer. The pieces assembled themselves in Salvatore's mind like a puzzle made of razor blades. Surveillance, access cards, temperature anomalies, professional-grade equipment. Someone was preparing something elaborate, something that required precise timing and inside knowledge. "Your assessment," he said. "Someone is planning to kill you during a family gathering. The surveillance provides intelligence about your routines, the access cards allow positioning of assets, and the wine cellar equipment suggests either explosives or environmental control, something that requires a countdown." Salvatore leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of 30 years in power pressing against his shoulders. The woman sitting across from him represented everything he'd trained himself to fear. The unknown variable, the outsider with inside access, the person who could read his secrets like sheet music. But she was also the only one who had seen the pattern, connected the dots, handed him the truth when everyone else had handed him lies wrapped in loyalty. "You're either a knife at my throat," he said slowly, "or the hand that moves it away. Which do you think I am?" The question hung between them like incense in a funeral parlor. Salvatore studied her face, the steady eyes, the controlled breathing, the way she held herself like someone accustomed to being the only adult in a room full of dangerous children. "I think," he said finally, "that you're the most dangerous person who's ever walked into this house. And I think that's exactly what I need." The decision felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. Everything in Salvatore's DNA screamed against it, 4 decades of paranoid conditioning rebelling against this moment of calculated trust. But the alternative was sitting still while enemies circled closer, pretending the water wasn't rising until it covered his mouth. "Internal audit," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Full access to all areas, all schedules, all personnel." You have the power to interrupt any routine, redirect any staff member, question any activity. You report only to me, and your word supersedes anyone else's in matters of household security." Nai's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a recognition of the power being placed in her hands. Mr. Greco and Marco won't appreciate the disruption to established protocols. Mr. Greco and Marco will adapt or find themselves seeking employment elsewhere. The words came out harder than he'd intended, but they felt right. "This is my house, bought with my blood and built on my choices. Anyone who has a problem with my decisions is welcome to make other arrangements." "Understood." "What do you need?" The question seemed to surprise her slightly, as if she'd expected more resistance, more conditions, more of the careful negotiation that usually accompanied such grants of authority. "Access to the dehumidifier controls," she said after a moment, "and the kitchen hood exhaust system." Salvatore blinked. Of all the things she might have requested, weapons, bodyguards, communication equipment, she was asking for household appliances. "Dehumidifier and kitchen hood," he repeated. "Yes. May I ask why?" "Insurance," Nai said. "If someone is planning to use the wine cellar for anything requiring precise environmental conditions, humidity and air circulation become critical factors. I want to be able to control those factors if necessary." The logic was sound, but something in her tone suggested there was more to it, a deeper strategy she wasn't ready to reveal. Salvatore made a decision that violated every instinct he'd cultivated since his first day in power. He chose not to ask. "Done," he said. "Giuseppe has the kitchen access codes, and maintenance can walk you through the dehumidifier system tomorrow." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Salvatore stood, moving to the window where rain painted abstract patterns on the glass. "What I've just given you is enough rope to hang us both. Use it wisely." "I will." "And Naomi?" He turned back to face her. "If I discover you're playing me, if this is some elaborate long game and you're the knife after all, I want you to know that your death will be neither quick nor merciful. I'll make it last long enough for you to regret every choice that brought you to my door." "I understand." "Good." He moved back to his desk, suddenly feeling older than his 58 years. "Then we understand each other. The house is yours to audit. Find me the truth, and I'll make sure you live to tell it." As Nai gathered her evidence and prepared to leave, Salvatore reflected on the mathematics of trust. He had just handed potentially lethal power to a woman he'd known for less than a week, based on nothing more than her ability to read a house like a crime scene and her willingness to whisper warnings in the dark. It was either the smartest decision he'd ever made, or the last one he'd lived to regret. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, counting down the seconds until he'd find out which. The wine cellar breathed with mechanical precision, its climate control system cycling every 8 minutes like clockwork. Nai descended the stone steps with a basket of cleaning supplies, but her real attention focused on the corner, where temperature readings spiked during quartet rehearsals. The climate unit wasn't listed in any of the villa's maintenance manuals. Giuseppe had shrugged when she'd asked about it, claiming ignorance of anything beyond his kitchen domain. But the device hummed with electronic life, its digital display showing readings that made no meteorological sense. Working quickly, Nai positioned herself beneath the main waterline that fed the villa's elaborate fountain system. The pipe ran directly above the suspicious unit, separated by barely 18 inches of stone and mortar. She opened her toolkit officially for cleaning, actually for precision sabotage. The puncture had to be perfect, small enough to seem like natural corrosion, positioned to create a slow but steady drip that would accelerate under pressure. She used a dental pick heated with a cigarette lighter, creating a pinhole that would weep moisture at precisely the right rate. Insurance. If whatever was planned required stable environmental conditions, she'd just introduced a variable that could drown their timeline in condensation and short circuits. The kitchen hood's electrical panel told a story written in wire and switches. Nai traced the circuits with her phone's flashlight, mapping connections that extended far beyond simple ventilation. The system tied into the building's sprinkler network, a safety feature that would trigger water suppression if cooking fires got out of control. Giuseppe watched her work with the bemused patience of a chef accustomed to health inspectors and their mysterious requirements. "The override," she said, pointing to a red switch behind a safety cage. "In case of emergency?" "C. Yes. Turn off the water if the system malfunctions. But his dangerous fire department gets very angry if you disable without permission." Nai memorized the sequence. Cage key from the hook beside the coffee machine, switch position, manual reset procedure. Another form of insurance. Another way to control the house's circulatory system when chaos needed choreography. Her surveillance became a dance of domestic efficiency. Signal detectors disguised as fabric freshener, hidden in towel stacks that traveled throughout the villa. Each room visit mapped electronic signatures and human patterns with equal precision. Marco Romano touched the study door handle every day at 3:17 p.m., exactly 17 minutes after Salvatore's afternoon security briefing ended. Greco made calls from the second-floor balcony at 4:30 p.m., always facing away from the courtyard cameras. Staff rotations followed a rhythm that created predictable blind spots and windows of opportunity that someone had clearly studied and exploited. The pattern formed a clock face in her mind. Personnel movements synchronized like gears in an elaborate timepiece, each rotation creating moments when the wrong person could be in the right place to do terrible things. Marco Romano's reflection wavered in the polished marble as he descended toward the wine cellar, his footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. The Maid situation was becoming problematic. Too many questions, too much access, too much of Uncle Sal's sudden and inexplicable trust. He'd made discreet inquiries about Naomi Jones. Her references checked out, her background seemed clean, but something felt wrong. Maids didn't ask about dehumidifier controls or study electrical panels with the focused intensity of an engineer. Maids didn't notice things that security professionals sometimes missed. More troubling was the way she moved through the house, purposeful rather than submissive, observant rather than invisible. She cataloged everything with the systematic attention of someone building a database rather than simply cleaning surfaces. The wine cellar felt different too. Cooler than usual, despite the climate control running constantly. Marco checked the readings on the mysterious unit Greco had installed, noting moisture levels that shouldn't exist in such a controlled environment. He touched the device's housing and came away with dampness on his fingers. Condensation where there should be none. Either the unit was malfunctioning, or someone was introducing variables into a system that demanded precision. Marco made a mental note to accelerate certain timelines. Variables had a way of multiplying, and too many variables could collapse the most careful plans. Nye's room was a study in controlled minimalism. Single bed, small desk, narrow closet, the quarters of someone who didn't plan to stay long or accumulate attachments. But hidden beneath her mattress, sealed in waterproof plastic, was a treasure trove of evidence that could reshape the Romano family tree. The security footage still was perfect. Timestamp 5:12 p.m., Marco Romano in the study corridor, silver tray in hand, replacing one crystal decanter with another. The resolution captured everything: his face, his movements, the careful positioning that suggested practiced routine rather than improvised opportunity. She'd printed multiple copies on the villa's office printer during the night shift, each one sealed and hidden in different locations. Evidence was worthless if it could be destroyed by a single search or a convenient fire. The ballistics report from Isaiah's death lay beneath the photos, 20 pages of technical analysis paid for with her savings and a favor from an old colleague. The trajectory calculations were damning. Shots fired from a rooftop position across from the Blue Moon Jazz Club, angle and velocity consistent with professional marksmanship, not random gang violence. The building lease records told the rest of the story. The rooftop access had been rented by Meridian Holdings, a shell company that traced back through 3 subsidiaries to Aquila Protective Services. The same Aquila that now provided security consultation to the Romano family, the same company whose invoices bore Vittorio Greco's careful signature. Isaiah hadn't died in a Romano family feud. He died because someone needed the Romano family to look responsible for civilian casualties, needed public outrage and police pressure to destabilize Salvatore's position from the outside, while conspiracy ate away from within. Her brother had been collateral damage in a war he never knew was being fought. The confrontation came as Nye polished silver in the main dining room, her hands working the tarnish from serving platters while her mind processed the day's intelligence gathering. Vittorio Greco appeared in the doorway like smoke made manifest, his approach so silent she might have missed it entirely if not for his reflection in the polished surface. "You work very thoroughly," he observed, settling into a chair that allowed him to watch her hands. "Such attention to detail is admirable." "Thank you, sir. I've been wondering about something." His voice carried the conversational tone that made dangerous questions sound like casual curiosity. "In your line of work, cleaning, organizing, making things presentable, do you find that sometimes the process changes the original?" Nye continued polishing, but her peripheral attention sharpened. "I'm not sure I understand. Polish, for instance. Applied correctly, it reveals the true nature of what lies beneath. But too much pressure, Too much friction. And you can wear away the very thing you're trying to preserve. Greco's fingers drummed against the table in a rhythm that matched the wine cellar's mechanical heartbeat. I suppose the question becomes, do you polish truth until it shines, or until it blinds? The metaphor landed with surgical precision, a test disguised as philosophy, a threat wrapped in intellectual discourse. Nye met his gaze in the silver's reflection, seeing her own face distorted beside his. I find that truth usually speaks for itself, she said. If you know how to listen. Greco's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or calculation. Indeed, well said. He rose from his chair with fluid grace, adjusting his cuffs in a gesture that somehow managed to seem both elegant and predatory. Do continue your excellent work, Naomi. I have a feeling the house has never been quite so thoroughly maintained. As he glided toward the door, Nye caught his reflection one final time in the polished silver, his image trapped and distorted in the surface she'd made mirror bright. The metaphor worked both ways, she realized. Sometimes the thing doing the polishing captured just as much truth as the thing being polished. The trap was set, the pieces were moving. And somewhere in the villa's carefully controlled environment, water dripped steadily toward electronic components that had been designed to function in perfect, predictable conditions. Time would tell whether her insurance policy paid the right dividends. The villa transformed after sunset, its corridors gleaming with the kind of polish that accompanied delicate negotiations. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany and marble, while the string quartet tuned their instruments in the music room, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, providing elegant cover for whatever electronic whispers needed masking. Nye moved through the preparations with practiced efficiency, but her attention focused on details that had nothing to do with domestic perfection. The cellar temperature had climbed 2 degrees in the past hour, cycling in 8-minute intervals that matched her earlier calculations. Her phone logged each spike with mechanical precision, building a timeline that felt like a countdown to catastrophe. In the study, the silver tray held 2 crystal decanters filled with amber liquid. The right-hand decanter had returned the same one Marco had switched at 5:12 3 days ago, now with a subtle sugar rim that would mask any bitter aftertaste. Professional work, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for molecular traces of sweetness where none should exist. Nye moved the decanter 1 coaster to the left, a small transgression that violated every rule of proper service, but one that would signal danger to anyone who understood the villa's precise protocols. The St. Michael statue's RF signature pulsed stronger now, synchronized with the quartet's warm-up scales. Someone was listening, and they were about to hear exactly what they'd been waiting for. The Portland families arrived at 8 sharp, their cars purring through the villa's gates like well-fed predators. Salvatore watched from his study window as men in expensive suits climbed marble steps, their movements careful and deliberate. These weren't random peacekeepers, these were sharks who smelled blood in the water. Vincent Torino, patriarch of the largest Portland operation, entered with the measured grace of a man accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Behind him came his lieutenants' faces Salvatore recognized from intelligence photos and federal surveillance reports. Good men to have as allies, lethal men to have as enemies. Drinks? Salvatore gestured toward the silver tray where 2 decanters caught the chandelier light. Your hospitality is legendary, Torino replied, but his eyes cataloged exit routes and potential weapons with the automatic paranoia of 30 years in power. Salvatore reached for the right-hand decanter, then stopped. The coaster placement was wrong, shifted 1 position to the left, in violation of protocols that had kept him alive for 4 decades. His hand moved to the left-hand decanter instead, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Naomi appeared in the doorway, her timing perfect as always. Shall I light the candles, sir? The chandelier seems to be malfunctioning. The lights had been fine moments ago, but Salvatore understood the performance. Yes, please. Candlelight suits the evening's mood. The chandelier circuit died with a whisper of collapsing voltage, plunging the study into the warm glow of emergency candles. Surveillance cameras loved steady illumination and predictable shadows. Candlelight made both nearly impossible. Nye left a towel on the service corridor floor as she passed, positioned to trip any motion sensors in the hallway leading to the wine cellar. Small obstacles had a way of buying crucial seconds when timing mattered more than comfort. Her phone buzzed with temperature alerts, cellar readings climbing past the critical threshold, 8-minute cycles accelerating to 6 minutes, then 4. Whatever waited in that basement was waking up, responding to electronic signals that pulsed through the house like an artificial heartbeat. The St. Michael's RF burst coincided perfectly with the quartet's crescendo. Data transmission masked by Vivaldi's genius, a technological symphony orchestrated by someone who understood both surveillance and classical music. Time to end the concert. The conversation with Torino proceeded through ritual pleasantries toward substantive negotiations, each word weighed and measured like ammunition. These talks could reshape territorial boundaries for the next decade, or they could be the prelude to a war that would consume both families. Cooperation benefits everyone, Torino was saying when the fire alarms shrieked to life. The sprinkler system engaged with mechanical fury, water cascading from ceiling nozzles in precise patterns designed to suppress kitchen fires. But the kitchen was 3 floors away, and cooking had ended hours ago. "My apologies," Salvatore said, rising from his chair as water soaked Persian rugs and scattered documents. "System malfunction. My staff will—" "Sir." Naomi appeared beside him, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Service corridor. Now." The authority in her tone brooked no argument. Salvatore followed her toward the concealed door that led to the staff passages, leaving Torino and his men to navigate the confusion on their own. The service corridor provided a direct route to the main floor, away from whatever was building toward critical mass in the wine cellar. Nai's phone displayed real-time readings from her improvised sensor network. Temperature spikes, RF bursts, and most critically, moisture levels climbing past the point where sensitive electronics could function reliably. "Where are we going?" Salvatore demanded as they moved through narrow passages designed for invisible staff movement. "Away from the explosion," Nai replied without breaking stride. The cellar door burst open behind them, and Nai glimpsed 2 figures scrambling through the flood, Vittorio Greco and Marco Romano, both wearing latex gloves and carrying electronics that had no business being in a wine storage area. They moved with the desperate efficiency of technicians trying to salvage a malfunction, but the water had done its work. Whatever device they'd installed was drowning in the condensation Nai had introduced through careful sabotage, its electronic brain short-circuiting in slow motion. Through the service corridor's small window, Salvatore watched his consigliere and nephew struggle with equipment that looked like a cross between a timing device and a chemistry set. Their faces carried the particular desperation of men whose careful plans were dissolving in real time. "How long have you known?" he asked Nai. "About the bomb? Since yesterday. About who was behind it. Since I found the Aquila invoices." "And you didn't tell me?" "I told you someone was planning to kill you during a family gathering. You didn't ask for specifics." The logic was unassailable, but it stung. His survival had depended on controlling every variable, knowing every detail. Trusting someone else to handle the mathematics of survival felt like learning a foreign language at gunpoint. Sirens approached from the distance fire department, probably police. Definitely more chaos than could be contained with routine explanations. Her phone's screen showed the final readings. Temperature dropping, RF signals dead, moisture levels climbing past critical thresholds. The device in the cellar bomb, chemical weapon, whatever Greco had planned was dying by degrees in the artificial flood she'd orchestrated. Through the window, she watched 2 men who'd spent months planning the perfect crime struggle with electronics that refused to function in environmental conditions they hadn't anticipated. Latex gloves couldn't hide guilt, and technical expertise became liability when your tools were drowning in condensation. The charge never detonated. The careful timing dissolved in humidity and human desperation. And somewhere in the villa's soaked corridors, a string quartet played on, their music providing soundtrack to the collapse of conspiracies built on mathematical precision. Greco and Marco stood ankle-deep in sprinkler water, holding evidence they couldn't explain, surrounded by the wreckage of plans that had seemed elegant in theory, but foundered on the simple reality that water and electricity made poor partners. The sirens grew louder, emergency vehicles responding to alarms that had been triggered not by accident but by design. Justice approaching at 60 miles per hour, called by a maid who'd learned to read houses like crime scenes. Salvatore Romano had survived another night, but barely. And in the service corridor that smelled of wet stone and old secrets, 2 people who'd started as strangers prepared to face questions that would reshape everything they thought they knew about trust, betrayal, and the price of staying alive in a world where family could be the most dangerous enemy of all. Noonlight flooded the study through tall windows, stripping away shadows and the comfortable ambiguity they provided. Salvatore Romano had arranged the room with judicial precision, his desk serving as bench, leather chairs forming a jury box for men who understood that loyalty was currency and betrayal was debt that could only be paid in blood. No lawyers, no federal mediators, No outside arbitrators who might complicate the ancient mathematics of family justice. Just blood relations, sworn oaths, and the weight of tradition that had kept the Romano name alive for 3 generations. The capos filed in with the careful silence of men attending a funeral where the deceased might still be breathing. Vincent Torino and his Portland delegation had departed at dawn, their peace negotiations postponed, pending resolution of internal family matters. The sprinkler incident had provided convenient cover for their withdrawal, but everyone understood the real reason. You didn't conduct business with a house actively bleeding from betrayal wounds. Vittorio Greco entered wearing the same immaculate charcoal suit he'd favored for 20 years of loyal service, his silver hair perfectly styled despite spending the previous night in police custody. Beside him, Marco Romano carried himself with the hollow bravado of a man who'd already calculated the odds and found them wanting. "Sit," Salvatore commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Saturday. Naomi Jones moved through the room with the ritual precision of a priest preparing communion, but instead of bread and wine, she arranged evidence on white linen that covered the coffee table like an altar cloth. Each piece of documentation was placed with deliberate care, building a case that would determine whether mercy or mathematics ruled the day. First, the Aquila invoices, months of payments authorized by Greco's signature, itemizing surveillance equipment and security consultations that had nothing to do with protecting the Romano family. The paper trail was elegant in its audacity, hiding conspiracy behind legitimate business expenses. Next, the photographs from the wine cellar, the device that had nearly detonated, its electronic components still bearing moisture stains from the flood that had saved Salvatore's life. Technical specifications printed from online manuals, purchase orders traced through shell companies, shipping records that painted a picture of careful preparation. The RF timestamps followed, synchronized with string quartet rehearsals and Greco's routine phone calls. Mathematical precision that revealed the rhythm of electronic eavesdropping, the pulse of betrayal measured in digital heartbeats. Then came the security still Marco at 5:12 p.m., silver tray in hand, switching crystal decanters with the casual efficiency of practiced routine. The timestamp burned into the image like a brand, marking the exact moment when familial loyalty became attempted fratricide. Finally, with movements that carried the weight of personal grief, Nye placed Isaiah Jones's death records on the linen, news clippings that blamed Romano shooters for crossfire violence, ballistics analysis that told a different story, professional angles from a rooftop position, not random gang warfare, building lease records that traced the sniper's nest to Aquila Protective Services, war by accounting, murder disguised as territorial dispute, a jazz pianist's life sacrificed to make Salvatore Romano look responsible for civilian casualties, creating public pressure and police attention that would weaken his position from outside while conspiracy ate away from within. "Gentlemen," Salvatore said, his voice cutting through the room's cathedral silence, "present your defense." Greco rose with fluid grace, his courtroom experience evident in the way he commanded attention without raising his voice. "With respect, Don Romano, this appears to be an elaborate fiction constructed by someone with access to office equipment and a vivid imagination. The invoices bear your signature. Signatures can be forged, documents can be fabricated. A cleaning lady with accounting background might possess skills that extend beyond proper service." Marco leaned forward, desperation sharpening his features. "Uncle Sal, you're trusting the word of a stranger over family. Someone you've known for weeks over people who've bled for this house. Have you?" Salvatore's question landed like a blade between ribs. "Bled for this house?" "Every day for 30 years, Greco interjected. "My loyalty is written in ledgers, sealed with handshakes, proven in battles that predate this woman's birth." "Your loyalty," Salvatore replied, "is apparently written in Aquila invoices and measured in electronic surveillance." The room held its breath. Capos, who'd witnessed 3 decades of Romano justice, understood they were seeing something unprecedented, not just the trial of conspirators, but the dismantling of trust that had held the family structure together. "The ballistics report on Isaiah Jones," Salvatore continued, lifting the document that had cost Nye her savings and a favor. "Professional marksmanship from a rooftop leased by your Aquila shell company. A civilian murdered to make me look responsible for collateral damage." Greco's composure cracked slightly. "Circumstantial connections. Coincidences arranged to seem significant." "Coincidences?" Salvatore's voice dropped to the register that had intimidated federal prosecutors and rival dons for 4 decades. 27 coincidences, documented with timestamps, synchronized with mathematical precision. "We're family," Marco said, his voice breaking slightly. "Blood doesn't lie to blood." "No," Salvatore agreed. "But blood can poison blood. Blood can sell blood. Blood can plan to bury blood in wine cellars with devices that count down to fratricide." The judgment came without theatrics, delivered in the same tone Salvatore might use to discuss weather or quarterly earnings. Justice in the Romano house had always been mathematics rather than drama-clean equations that balanced accounts written in loyalty and betrayal. "Vittorio Greco," he said, and the use of the full name carried the weight of formal excommunication. "You are stripped of position, stripped of protection, stripped of the name you've carried for 30 years. You will be delivered to outside arbitration, specifically to Vincent Torino's people, who have questions about territorial violations and unauthorized surveillance of peace negotiations." Greco's face went white, understanding that outside arbitration was a death sentence wrapped in diplomatic language. "Marco Romano," Salvatore continued, "you are exiled under iron conditions. You will leave Seattle within 24 hours, never return to Washington State, never contact family members, never use the Romano name in business or personal dealings. Violation of these terms will be considered a declaration of war against this house. Uncle, the terms are not negotiable." Salvatore stood, his authority filling the room like incense in a cathedral. "Effective immediately, all tribute is paused. All business operations are halted. All territorial agreements are suspended pending complete internal review." The capos shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just judgment on two conspirators. This was systematic destruction of everything they'd built, the kind of house cleaning that could take years to recover from. "We hold power," Salvatore said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "by telling the truth faster than anyone else can lie. Truth is the only currency that never devalues, the only weapon that never misfires, the only shield that never cracks." He gestured toward the evidence arranged on white linen like offerings to an ancient god of justice. "This is truth. Everything else is just expensive fiction." The capos filed out in stunned silence, their faces carrying the particular pallor of men who'd witnessed the collapse of certainties they'd considered immutable. Some would adapt, understanding that the Romano house had just reset its foundation on bedrock rather than sand. Others would seek employment elsewhere, unwilling to navigate the new mathematics of loyalty. Greco and Marco were escorted away by men whose expressions suggested they understood the weight of their responsibilities. No dramatics, no final speeches, just the quiet efficiency of a machine designed to eliminate problems before they metastasized. Alone except for Nye, Salvatore watched her fold the linen with the same careful precision she'd used to arrange the evidence. The altar became simple furniture again. The courtroom returned to being a study where an old man conducted the business of survival. At the chapel alcove, she worked with small tools to remove the remaining surveillance equipment from St. Michael's bronze wing. But instead of polishing away all traces of violation, she left a deliberate scratch, a scar that would remind anyone who looked closely that even saints could be compromised, that vigilance was the price of sanctuary. The house felt different now, quieter, cleaner, like a wound that had been lanced and was finally beginning to heal. But healing, Salvatore understood, was just another form of mathematics. And the equation that would determine whether the Romano house survived this purge was still being written, one careful decision at a time. The Persian rug bore stains that no amount of professional cleaning would ever fully remove, dark patches where sprinkler water had mixed with 30 years of cigar ash and whispered secrets. Salvatore stood at the study windows, watching Seattle's lights flicker through glass that had been sealed shut since the Clinton administration. For the first time in decades, he'd ordered the windows opened. Night wind carried scents he'd forgotten existed, salt air from the Sound, rain on concrete, the honest smell of a city that didn't require climate control to breathe. The silence felt different too. No electronic whispers from St. Michael's wing, no RF bursts synchronized with distant music, no hidden heartbeat counting down to betrayal. The house had been exorcised, its ghosts banished, its secrets dragged into daylight where they could no longer fester in shadow. But confession, Salvatore understood, was a bilateral contract. Truth shared rather than hoarded, vulnerability offered in exchange for the same dangerous currency. He turned from the window to find Naomi Jones arranging the last of the evidence files in bankers' boxes, her movements efficient despite the late hour. She'd worked 18 hours straight, transforming from domestic help to forensic accountant to something he couldn't quite name but desperately needed. "The nap was a lie," he said without preamble. Her hands stilled on the files. "I know. I've been testing people since I was old enough to understand that trust was a luxury that could get you buried. 40 years of staged scenarios, manufactured crises, elaborate performances designed to reveal true character under pressure. Nye looked up from the boxes, her expression neutral but attentive. I survived by making everyone prove themselves, again and again. Until paranoia became a religion and isolation became scripture. His voice carried the weight of decades spent measuring loyalty and degrees of treachery prevented. It kept me alive, but it also kept me alone. The admission hung between them like smoke from an extinguished candle, acrid and honest. Nye had suspected the staged nap from the beginning, breathing too controlled, positioning too convenient, the whole scenario carrying the artificial quality of performance theater. But understanding the mechanics wasn't the same as comprehending the mathematics. 40 years of testing loyalty, 4 decades of treating every relationship like a potential crime scene. The kind of existence that would hollow out a man's capacity for genuine human connection, leaving only the brittle shell of survival instincts. I came here to bury you, she said, matching his directness with her own. If you deserved it. Salvatore's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, recognition rather than surprise. As if he'd been waiting for this confession since the night she'd whispered warnings in his ear. Isaiah wasn't collateral damage. She continued. He was a message. Someone used his death to make you look responsible for civilian casualties, to turn public opinion against your family while they worked from the inside. And if you'd found evidence that I'd ordered that shooting, then you'd be dead and I'd be gone. No hesitation, no softening of the brutal mathematics. My brother deserved justice, not revenge. But I would have made sure he got one or the other. The honesty was refreshing in its lethality, clean as a surgical blade, sharp enough to cut through the comfortable lies that had insulated him from genuine human contact for most of his adult life. She'd walked into his house carrying a death sentence, prepared to execute it if the evidence demanded such justice. Instead, she'd found a different kind of crime. Family betrayal dressed as loyalty, conspiracy wearing the mask of tradition, murder planned by the very people entrusted with preventing it. So where does that leave us? He asked. That depends, Nye replied. On whether you want to keep living like a man expecting assassination, or whether you're ready to try something different. Different how? She gestured toward the open windows, the ruined rug, the evidence boxes that contained the mathematical proof of trust misplaced and loyalty betrayed. You said we hold power by telling the truth faster than anyone else can lie. What if we built something on that principle? What if truth became the foundation instead of just another weapon? The proposal was dangerous in its simplicity. Trust as infrastructure rather than luxury, honesty as operational doctrine rather than occasional tactic. It would require dismantling the elaborate security theater that had kept Salvatore alive but isolated, replacing paranoid protocols with something more radical, authentic human connection. A code, she said, working through the implications as she spoke. Clear rules, mutual obligations, accountability that runs both directions. Explain. You give me authority to cut power to any room, cancel any meeting, stop any conversation that feels wrong. I become your early warning system, your circuit breaker for situations that smell like conspiracy. And in return, I owe you the truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. No comfortable lies, no diplomatic evasions, no protecting your feelings at the expense of your life. Salvatore moved to his desk, fingers tracing the mahogany surface where so many deals had been negotiated, so many fates decided. The mathematics of the arrangement appealed to him: clear inputs and outputs, defined responsibilities, measurable results. You'd have the power to override my decisions. In matters of security, yes. In matters of truth, absolutely. That's more authority than I've given anyone in 30 years. And you'd be trusting someone who walked into your house planning to kill you if circumstances demanded it. The irony was exquisite. The most dangerous person who'd ever entered his home was also the only one offering genuine partnership rather than elaborate submission. She'd proven her competence in the crucible of conspiracy, demonstrated her loyalty through actions rather than words, and earned trust by being completely honest about her initial intentions. The mirror, he said, gesturing toward a small, ornate-looking glass that had belonged to his grandmother. I want it installed in the arm of my chair. Sir? When I lean back, I want to see the room's reflection. I want to see you working, watching, keeping the kind of vigilance that doesn't require paranoia to be effective. Nye nodded, understanding the symbolism. Transparency as security measure, visibility as protection, the acknowledgement that survival might require giving up the illusion of total control. "There's something else," she said. "Your nephew had access codes to systems I couldn't identify. Whatever Greco planned, it was more comprehensive than just surveillance and assassination. There might be other assets, other preparations we haven't discovered. Then we keep digging, together." The word felt foreign in his mouth. Partnership rather than hierarchy, collaboration rather than command. But the alternative was returning to the isolation that had nearly gotten him killed, trusting no one until trust became impossible. Later, after the mirror had been carefully positioned and the boxes sealed for storage in the villa's secure archive, Nye stood beside the open windows and breathed air that smelled like freedom rather than fear. The reflection caught them both, Salvatore in his chair, herself at the window, two people who'd started as strangers and discovered something more valuable than alliance. Mutual recognition of the price survival extracted, and the possibility that there might be a different way to pay it. "The house feels different," she observed. "It should. We're different." Outside, Seattle's lights painted abstract patterns on the sound, the city breathing through another night, while two people who'd learned to read danger in domestic details prepared for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. The mirror would show them truth, but truth, they'd learned, was just the beginning. The real work was deciding what to do with it once you had it, whether to hoard it like currency or spend it like investment in a future that might actually be worth living. In the reflection, a Mafia Don and a Maid turned guardian stared back, their images overlapping in glass that had been polished to perfect clarity. Neither illusion nor theater, just the honest sight of two people who'd chosen trust over safety and found that survival might be possible without sacrificing their souls to achieve it. The code was set, the partnership sealed, and in a house that had spent decades breathing lies, truth was finally learning to fill its lungs. 3 weeks after the family council, the Romano villa breathed differently. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been sealed for decades, carrying scents that security protocols had once deemed too risky to allow salt air from the sound, coffee from the neighborhood cafe, the honest smell of a city that no longer felt like a collection of potential assassination angles. Nye moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, but her path traced new geometries of vigilance. The security cameras had been repositioned with mathematical precision, their overlapping fields eliminating the blind spots that had allowed conspiracy to flourish in shadow. No more 20-second loops, no more convenient gaps where betrayal could move unseen. The coasters in Salvatore's study sat exactly where they belonged, not from rigid paranoia, but from intentional design. Each placement communicated safety protocols to anyone who understood the language. Left side for cleared liquids, right side for items requiring verification, a center position for emergency signals that would bring Nye running regardless of her current location. In the chapel alcove, St. Michael bore his scar with bronze dignity. The scratch she'd left after removing the surveillance equipment had been deliberately preserved, a small reminder that even sacred spaces required vigilant guardianship. That sanctuary was something you built and maintained rather than simply inherited. The morning staff meeting reflected the villa's new operational philosophy. Anna polished silver with the same careful attention as always, but now she understood that housekeeping directives carried the weight of security protocols. Giuseppe prepared coffee with his usual precision, but he also knew that kitchen schedules were coordinated with electronic sweeps and personnel rotations. "The delivery from Marconi Imports," Nye said, consulting the tablet that had replaced handwritten schedules. "Giuseppe, verify the driver's credentials before accepting anything. Anna, I need you to dust the second-floor cameras after lunch. They're collecting Pacific Northwest moisture faster than the climate control can compensate." Simple domestic instructions that were actually operational security, disguised as household management. The staff had adapted quickly, understanding that their new housekeeper's authority extended far beyond linens and cleaning supplies. The morning mail brought confirmation of what Nye considered her most important victory. The Isaiah Jones Fund had received its nonprofit certification. No press release, no public announcement, just quiet legal documentation that would allow music lessons to be funded, safe transportation to be provided for late-night gigs, and a standing legal advocate to be available for musicians who needed representation but couldn't afford it. She'd insisted on anonymity for the Romano family's role in the foundation. Justice for Isaiah didn't require public recognition. It required systematic prevention of the circumstances that had made his death possible. Young musicians would have safer options, better protection, and legal support that might keep them out of the crossfire that had claimed her brother. The irony wasn't lost on her. a Mafia don funding arts programs and legal aid. But then, the mathematics of redemption often produced unexpected equations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dante, her nephew, now enrolled in piano lessons at the neighborhood music center the fund had quietly supported. "Aunt Nye, I can play Strange Fruit now," the version Uncle Isaiah used to love. Some victories were measured in prevented tragedies. Others were measured in 7-year-old fingers learning to create beauty instead of witnessing destruction. The afternoon brought a visit from Vincent Torino, the Portland patriarch whose peace negotiations had been interrupted by sprinkler systems and family justice. This time he came alone, a gesture of respect that acknowledged the Romano house's return to stability. "Interesting changes," he observed, accepting coffee served in the china with gold rim that had once been reserved for testing purposes. "Word on the street is that you've established new operational parameters." "Clarifications rather than changes," Salvatore replied, but his tone carried the authority of absolute conviction. "No civilian casualties, no fires where children sleep, no electronic whispers through religious statuary. Bold policies in our line of work. Sustainable policies. Fear is profitable in the short term, but trust compounds over time. We're investing in the long game." Torino nodded, recognizing the mathematics of reputation management. A don who could clean his own house and establish clear ethical boundaries was a don worth respecting, worth doing business with, worth trusting with territorial agreements that might last decades rather than seasons. The negotiations proceeded smoothly, conducted in natural light through open windows, with security measures that prioritized transparency over paranoia. Business as usual, except that usual had been completely redefined. Evening found Nye in Salvatore's study, reviewing the day's intelligence reports. Nothing dramatic, routine surveillance of legitimate business competitors, background checks on potential partners, the kind of standard due diligence that kept operations profitable without crossing into the surveillance theater that had nearly gotten everyone killed. "The Torino agreement is solid," she reported. "Clean territorial divisions, clear profit-sharing arrangements, dispute resolution protocols that favor negotiation over violence. And internally, the staff has adapted to the new protocols. Anna found a listening device in the guest bathroom commercial grade, probably left over from Greco's comprehensive surveillance network. Giuseppe reported a delivery truck that didn't match its scheduled manifest. Both situations handled according to protocol. No drama, no bloodshed, no elaborate tests of loyalty. No need. People are either trustworthy or they're not. The elaborate theater just made it harder to tell the difference. As rain began its familiar percussion against the windows, Salvatore settled into his chair, the same leather throne where he'd once staged elaborate naps to test the loyalty of people he'd never learned to trust. But now the mirror in the chair's arm showed him something different. Not the reflection of a man expecting assassination, but the image of someone learning to live without constant fear. Nye moved to the windows, opening them to let the storm's honest scent replace the artificial atmosphere that had insulated the house from the world beyond its walls. The room filled with the smell of weather rather than old smoke, of rain rather than gun oil, of a house finally learning to breathe. "The cameras show all clear," she reported, but the words were routine rather than urgent. The villa's new security architecture was comprehensive enough that threats would be identified long before they reached critical stages. And tomorrow's schedule? Morning meeting with the accountants, legitimate ones this time. Lunch with the City Planning Commission about the waterfront development project. Evening free, unless something urgent develops. A schedule built on actual business rather than elaborate security theater. Meetings conducted in daylight rather than shadow. Plans that extended months into the future rather than just surviving until dawn. In the mirror's reflection, Salvatore watched Nye work adjusting window latches, checking electronic sensors, maintaining the vigilant care that had replaced paranoid isolation. Two guardians keeping each other honest, protecting something worth preserving through methods that didn't require sacrificing their humanity to achieve security. The Sphinx at rest, no longer needing to pose riddles because the most important questions had finally been answered. Trust was possible, partnership was sustainable, and survival didn't require living like a man perpetually expecting his own funeral. Outside, Seattle breathed through another night, the city's lights reflecting off rain-washed windows that no longer needed to be sealed against the world. Inside, two people who'd learned to read danger in domestic details continued their quiet revolution, proving that the most radical act in a world built on betrayal might simply be the decision to tell each other the truth. The house with windows had learned to see clearly, and what it saw was the possibility of tomorrow. If you enjoyed the story, hit subscribe, drop a like, and comment your city below. I want to know where this story found you tonight. Click the next video on your screen for another dark mafia story.